Welcome to the Obojima Podcast. My name is Jeremiah, and I'm with Adam and Ari, and we are the writers of Obojima, and you have joined us for our weekly writers meeting, where we sit down, we chat Obojima, we talk about cool stuff, and some of it may make it in the book, some of it may never. Who's really to say? That being said,
you are to say.
I am technically I am to say.
You are the grand arbiter.
This week, we're talking cities, not just any city, the city. New York.
New York.
We're talking about Yatterman.
Yeah.
The biggest city in Obojima. So, in Obojima, in the book, we gave 2 locations 6 pages instead of 3. Mm-hmm. And that was Sky Kite, and that was Yatterman.
Yeah.
That was not enough for Yatterman. Yatterman needs more. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to expand on Yatterman. We're going to talk about it. It's the biggest city. It needs info. Now, we kind of did this a little bit. We kind of talked about Yatterman's special, special faction, right? We haven't named them yet, but we were calling them the Guardian Angels based off of the inspiration, right? And so, let's just expand on the space. I think really it's, I don't have anything in particular I want to talk about. Well, maybe I do.
Yeah.
Maybe I have a few things in particular. Actually, let's this first episode, I think, for this first episode, let's keep it vague.
Okay.
So let's just talk about the expansion of Yatterman. What is it missing? We go into detail about a few things, right? We talk about some characters. Some of them are important. Some of them are not important. Not to say not important, but some of them are less connected to the overall story of Obojima. Mm-hmm. But we include quite a bit. This is a big section. This is a location where most, not all, but most of the factions all commingle and exist. It's a big place for spirits. It's a big place for first age tech. It is the epitome of all of the things that we've talked about in Obojima, all collapsing in one space and commingling and mixing and doing cool stuff. But we didn't really get to expand on a lot of that because there's so many things happening. We get to give little snapshots of those things. We say, this exists here. Here's a little bit about it. Let's move on to the next thing. Yeah. So I want to sit here and I want to talk about, let's break down some of the geography. Let's break down some of the important pieces of information that we should know when going into Yatterman. And so, to be fair, Adam and I have chatted about this outside of it. But let's bring Ari in and let's talk. So, Adam, you kind of were breaking down Yatterman into not regions, but neighborhoods, right? The city itself is a first age city that has been is now lived in by the Obojiman people, and so it was laid out as a modern city, right? And so you kind of broke that up into some different spaces. Now, you're not required to remember them all, but what are some of the things that you're thinking about, or as you break things up into a city, how do you think neighborhoods form? These categorizations of specific areas within the city.
Some of it, you think back to first age times, however they laid out the city was how they laid it out. But, through the millennia to now, Obojimans have kind of moved in and created their own sort of, their own way of using the city. But, one idea was that there's this kind of green belt park system that runs throughout the entire city. It could also be that this park follows, most cities are built on rivers or, that kind of thing. So maybe there's a canal or a river that runs through the city and it winds, and it's all sort of this sculpted, manicured
forest
park system.
Yeah.
And
it just naturally divides the city into these sections.
2 sections. Yeah. And then you could have an area where
Portland.
Like, whoa.
Yes, well, art imitating life. So, but then there could also be markets. We were talking about maybe a witches market where there's like, potions that are brewed and witches because, and then also like the witchery. There's a place in Yadaman that we could build all kinds of information around. There's also the Happy Joy Cake Factory.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what magic wonders are in the Happy Joy Cake Factory, because that is something that has actually spread across Obojima, and most Obojimas from the east to west, north to south know and dare I say love Happy Joy Cakes for their deliciousness, but then also strangely magical properties.
Yeah, I feel like
which we have yet to define.
It's true. I feel like something that we were missing from the first book is some of this, we have an overview of Yadaman. We're missing some of its character, I think. Like what makes portions of Yadaman, like I think we give snapshots that are like really cool. Like the hive is like, that tells me that there's a portion of Yadaman that to me feels like downtown at night Shibuya, or like some, or like a hyper modern, like Asian city, like Seoul or something like that, where it's like the nightlife is there and people are like, out having a good time and perhaps getting drunk or partaking in different things. And they, on their way home, there's a place that they have dedicated in the city for people to sleep for free. Like these pockets for you to go and live and rest and wake up in the morning.
Or just sleep it off.
That really says something about the culture.
Yeah. This is the wild part of Obojima. Like most of Ojima is pastoral and idyllic and, it's rural and rustic. But when you come to Yadaman, it is it's almost a culture shock within Obojiman society. Like and most adventurers will ultimately be drawn here because you've got to experience it. You've got to experience this crazy place. It is a faster paced way of life. There's spirits. There's a lot of spirit activity here because there's actually a portal that leads to and from the spirit realm. So you've got a lot of spirits that are visiting here. Spirits visit this place probably first from the spirit realm. And then also spirits get to kind of inhabit mopeds and K-trucks and all these like mechanical devices that then are powered by spirit energy. There's a trolley system that goes through Yadaman that is run by a spirit. So then all the neon lights are like activated by spirits. Little tiny light spirits live in them. And so you've got this total different vibe going on here. And then, as we've said in this book, like first age tech and the first stage cities don't decay. So there's some kind of latent magic that's still in the city itself. And, how does that sort of manifest an effect?
Right, it's an entire first stage location.
Yeah.
Right. Like that's just that itself makes it unique. But in terms of like its character, I'm wondering, you talk about neighborhoods. Is there, even in the first stage tech, oftentimes you look at different cities and there are cities that are, you could see, this is the old city, right? This is like the oldest part of the city, and then it has expanded and stuff like that. Is that the case with Yadaman? Like, is the nucleus of Yadaman first stage and it has since expanded, right? So if you get to certain neighborhoods, like, this is a new neighborhood. This is, I say new, like new to first stage tech. Like, was this like, are there Nakudama ruins here, or things like that? Those are things I would want to know about if we're going to expand on Yadaman. Like the nature of these different neighborhoods. That's one of my favorite things about visiting Portland or living in Seattle, is that each neighborhood has its own distinct flavor. And so those are things, and
that was, something about the exploration of that. Like, it's like, they're in this area, like maybe around the witchery. The witchery itself is a old movie house, but in the surrounding neighborhood could be places where apprentice witches get a chance to try out their skills. And so there could be maybe like 6 or 10 city blocks in a square in an area around this building where you have a lot of witch activity and you have a lot of like places you can go to find, to try things out and maybe you're finding ingredients or you're making magic items or that kind of stuff. So
I think something interesting too is you think about like immigration and a lot of at least in the United States, you'll see like neighborhoods become hubs for immigrants who are coming in to live within the United States, and so they tend to come in and they know someone who's immigrated before them and has gone through the process, and now they're living in a space, and so they might come in to move close, so they have that connection and it forms a community. And that often, like I think California is a great example of that, where you see like different area codes within California become these area codes that are not, haven is a weird way, but like places where it's like, hey, you're moving from Jamaica, and it's like, okay, you're moving from Jamaica, this is a community of Jamaicans who live within the space, and then you tend to move in that thing. I could almost see the same thing happening within Yatterman, where it's like the rift is here, and the area that the rift appears in with the city, the neighborhood, is this like where a lot of the spirits gravitate towards, because it's like that's where a lot of them are living. And now obviously they live everywhere. It's not like it's subjugated to stick in this space, but like they tend to naturally like, oh yeah, like this portion, or maybe it's like maybe there's a lot of businesses run by spirits in that space or whatever. Yeah. Like it happens throughout the city, but like this is a hub where spirits come to at night, and they like I really love the idea of, like you were saying, the spirits like inhabiting the lights and things like that. I love it. It didn't even occur to me until you said it, but this feeling of like a narrow space, a narrow alleyway between buildings, and there's all of this first age tech, and none of the spirits are inhabiting it or like whelming it. But as they walk by, it's constantly like turning on and off. And so like this blockway is full of neon signs and TVs and vending machines, and they're all like constantly like flickering because no one's whelming them, but they're constantly on because all the spirits are next by. And so it's just like, like the TV's always cutting in and out or whatever. And I love that idea.
Yeah. I mean, there's something about thinking about back to the immigration thing is like language and culture is one of those things that kind of define like why people congregate. So like if there's a bunch of people that understand a certain culture, like I had a buddy of mine who was Portuguese, and so there's a certain area of California where a lot of Portuguese people go. One of the reasons is because they all speak the language. Some people who come over and they only speak Portuguese, it's a great place for them to like experience community where they can communicate, and then while they're doing that, learn English and then find a way to integrate that way. And the other place is where they can celebrate culture. It's like they're celebrating food. There's things that they're familiar with, and it gives that sense of like kind of comfort as they're growing into a new area. So it could be that as spirits move from the spirit realm in, they're speaking Torum, and maybe there's few spirits that speak Torum and Common. And so there's this thing where when you go into this neighborhood that is generally spirit run and owned, that, as a character, like, do you speak Torum or can you learn it? And then it kind of starts to tell us like, okay, can we develop a spiritual culture? Like, what do they eat? What kind of music do they play? What kind of festivals do they have? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. I love that.
That's fun.
So, so culture is something that draws people in. I think also neighborhoods can often, in Portland, the industrial zone or the industrial area is something where on the western side of the city, on the western side of the river splits the city in two. On the western side of the river, there's the industrial area, which is often like it. You have big corporations there, but you'll also have like a mom and pop shop that are like, we've been melting steel into steel goo for 25 years. Get your steel goo here. And you're like, what does this do? And you're like, no idea, but somebody likes it. Yeah. Right. So I feel like profession can often also cultivate a specific area where it's like maybe this is the crafters, like a neighborhood dedicated to craftsmanship in some capacity. So like cobblers and glass artists and things like that will surround and develop in an area.
What's your take then on like residences, or like residential areas? Are there zones like that, or do you imagine it's like throughout the city, it's a lot of storefronts and stuff on the first floor, and then you have people living above them? Like, what is your take on that?
I mean, one of the things that just flashed through my head was like, it would be interesting for us to create, like, because First Age is basically based on 1980s Japan to some degree, like the First Age city, to have things that would make sense, like we in the real life, we would understand it like, oh, this place was at one time a shopping mall. But Obojimans wouldn't necessarily understand what a shopping mall is. But they might, if Obojimans went into that place, what would they do with it? Like they would create like a marketplace, or like a steel smelting factory if we had one in the First Age Yatterman. But what would Obojimans look? They would have, they're these giant big pots. Well, I guess we'd plant trees in them or something like that, and like, oh, the way Obojimans use this technology or these spaces aren't really what the First Age people built them for. That would be a fun thing to play with. It's just like, what things from the First Age translate one-to-one to Obojima society, like a grain mill, maybe, but then what things wouldn't translate, Obojimans wouldn't understand it. So
I love that idea. As a human experiencing Obojima, you look at like, oh, you walk by an apartment complex, like a Philadelphia apartment complex, big structure with all of these individual houses and rooms, and you're like, oh, people live in there. It's like, no. There's 135 storefronts in there, and each hall has a different plate, and it's like, not what it was intended for, but it doesn't matter. It's just what happened.
So that's interesting. I would actually like to. It'd be an interesting thing to show at some point, if there's an opportunity for this, like a cross section of an apartment building.
Yeah.
But then see like, oh, the fourth floor is actually the marketplace floor, and you just go down there, and all the homes are stores basically, and you could actually. Each one of these enormous sky rises could be a neighborhood by itself, right?
Totally. And we'd even discussed like a parking garage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
Having that.
I think that's I love First Age Czech being twisted in a very unique Obojima way, and I think Yatterman's the playground for that. I think it's just about figuring out what places we want to highlight in that space. So the other thing, we had talked about this like big park that like kind of twists and moves around and separates the city in some capacity. How do Obojimans feel about that? Like, obviously it's not like they'd be like, oh, it's terrible, but like what is it used for? For us in modern times, parks are put in places to allow you to connect with nature in some capacity, but in a fantasy setting where you're like, I'm trying to get away from nature and have some safety. How does a park like this function for them? Are they using it as like this tranquil place? Like in Japan, I'm forgetting the name. Pardon me. Like rock gardens and things like that, created to help monks focus and while they're
like Zen gardens.
Yeah, Zen gardens were to meditate. That's the word. Right. Helped to bring on a sensation for meditation. Right. This calm. And so is that the same thing that this is used? Is it curated and kept by the Sword School or maybe a different organization to bring on this like experience of nature within this major First Age place? Or is it like kind of wild and it's like the place where it's like, well, animals live and spirit, like what is how does this park serve what does it serve in Yatterman?
we know like in Obojima they love festivals, so
Yeah.
I'm wondering if like Parkland is reserved for that. But I also like the idea of a city where we could make Yatterman different than festivals in other places, in that the city you get block parties, right? Basically that kind of thing. So it's a good question about parks. Is there a game that people play? Like, what's the equivalent of like disc golf?
Yeah.
Or like like what? It being just an open space could be. I mean, all sorts of fun things could happen there. But like,
it could also be like a home for spirits. Like maybe there are just some spirits that are nature spirits, and so in order to have a home for them, it's like there's this sort of natural space that goes through. Maybe the river is, or the canal or river, whatever it is significant, that place spawns certain spirits come out of it, or certain spirits like to live around it, or even people like to live by it.
Does it serve as a method for us to introduce danger? Do howlers use this as a place to get deeper into the city under the guise of the forest that's in the park?
It should always be a source of danger.
Is it also like, there's shadier parts of Yatterman? Is this like a place that smugglers might use?
That brings up a topic that I wanted to discuss about Yatterman, about
danger?
About the dangers of the city, but that are unique to a city, right? Like we talked about yesterday, just like pickpockets and stuff. Like the cities offer anonymity in ways that like smaller towns don't, right? That's that you can getting lost in the crowd.
I not to interrupt.
No, yeah.
But I just watched an amazing documentary on brutalism, the construction of brutalism and architecture of brutalism. And the reason brutalism failed in a lot of major cities is because of all of these huge structures and arcing angles and these corners that are produced. It builds hidden areas for nefarious deeds. Like it's like places where like in a standard structure, it's like this hallway leads to the end of the hallway, and this is how you get underneath the main highway. But it's like, well, because of the uniqueness of brutalism, it's like building traps for the citizens.
Oh, wow.
It's like nefarious. Like people learned how to abuse brutalism in a way. It's like, I can sit here, you cannot see me. It's in a dead zone, and I rob someone here every night. And it's like that. It's just this weird take on like places in Europe that like specifically in Germany and other places like that, where they added brutalism and how it affected crime rates, and it was just very interesting. And so like to throw it back to Ari now, like the structures, like big structures, is a different feeling than Okiri Village. Like you're not gonna get robbed in Okiri Village because there's nowhere to hide. It's like big open fields. Like
in the Yatterman section in the book. Like just like in the locations, we have the breakdown of the different factions. Yeah, but those factions are like the island-wide factions. Yatterman is a location that would have groups that are unique and exclusive to Yatterman. So like, the classic D&D concept is there a thieves guild? Is there organized crime here? You talk about smuggling. That implies that there are certain things that are not okay to bring into Yatterman. Right, so what would that be? What are the kind of the illicit goods that are here, that are in the Obojima flavor, like that it would be in palate for the world? Those are things that are that's stuff that I know that I could get game mileage out of. Right?
I immediately think of cursed objects. Like cursing is a thing that happens in Obojima. It's things demons can do or nefarious spirits. We talk about curses. We don't necessarily create rules for it, but I imagine superstition around curse objects is pretty strong, even if they're useful. And so I wonder if, smugglers or thieves bringing in objects that are quote unquote cursed within Yatterman is like very frowned upon. But there's also maybe maybe there's people who don't care, and it's like, I need these things or I want these things. Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm using a cursed ladle right now, and it's making me sick, but I'm serving the best broth on this side of the island right now. Like I'm rivaling Hakamon or whatever.
Yeah.
Or it's like, oh yeah, like this like little token that I have that I put under my doormat. It's like bringing me extra customers, but at the same time, it's like maybe it's causing pest spirits to turn into demons around my area. And now the guardian angels have to come in and are like, what's going on? Like, this is like the third thing that's happened in the last 3 weeks. Like, this is abnormal, right? Like, I like that. I like the cursed object thing, and maybe there's people that want it and don't quite care how it affects their community.
So there are ways to get this stuff, right? So like that to me is now intriguing, right? You have these hidden places where this kind of stuff happens, and who's trying to stop them, right? Who's out there? Is there an official capacity to stop this kind of stuff from happening, or is it kind of locals banding together, as the two of you talked about before?
And like, who even understands it? Like, Obojima as a whole is very kind of naive, like most Obojimans are. When you get to Yadamon, you're gonna have sort of the yokels from around, but then in Yadamon, it's sort of like when I went to New York City. It's like I felt totally like a fish out of water there. I felt like I was moving at a different frame rate than the New Yorkers. Like, New Yorkers all like talking really fast, and if I'm like dozy and looking and staring, they're like, come on, move on, like it's like, say hey.
Tommy guns and cigars.
But there's a certain kind of that energy. Like, Yadamon might not be that extreme, but like, what do Yadamon residents, like, even maybe some Yadamon residents go get it, but maybe there's certain groups that understand that there's this, like, maybe somebody's, like a witch has a vial of corruption from the eastern side of the island, and they're dealing with it. Like, and like, what other levers can we pull that are the dangers? Like, there's howlers that are dangerous. There's corruption that is dangerous. There's curses that are dangerous. There's demons that are dangerous. Like, what other dangers? I mean, if it's, Yadamon's going to have it all, because Yadamon is sort of the New York City of Obojima.
And so like, other city kind of ideas or kind of tropes that you think about with cities are like infestations of things, right? Like, what are the pests that are here? Are they pest spirits, or are there actual like creatures that, what's the equivalent? What's the Yadamon version of the pigeon, right? Or the rat?
Interesting.
Roaches,
like right? Or roaches,
yeah. I feel like that's a good point, right? We definitely have pest spirits throughout the space. But are there some Yadamon specific? Well, bad ones.
Dust bunnies are kind of adorable, but they can be pesky. But what if there's some that are really kind of bad? Like, whoa, if you get this, it's trouble.
Is there, is it all pest spirits, or are there natural creatures that exist there too?
Right.
Could be both.
Yep.
Is there, interesting. Maybe they come from the forest. Maybe it's just like, oh yeah, you see like these things love to live, in the same way that pigeons and squirrels have lived, and like crows and have learned to live in the city, and are now like basically, functioning within the city and know how to like trick people to get food and stuff, right?
Thinking about when Ari and I went to lunch probably a couple of times when we were on a podcast earlier.
Yeah.
And we were sitting there eating, and there was this pigeon. And it was kind of like
this bedraggled pigeon. Only right after that did we were like, oh, and bird flu is like,
it was just all slimy looking, and it just was like, it had one like,
it was struggling,
like a gnarly foot, and it was like desperate, and it was kind of freaky. At first, I was like, oh, little buddy, and then I was like, oh, don't get too close, and it just kept getting closer.
Yeah.
So
and there's an area in Seattle, kind of close to the waterfront, as you start at the waterfront, and that is there are basically 3 types of birds that are near the waterfront, and inland, that are all kind of like battling for territory. There are seagulls, pigeons, and crows, and there are like certain pockets like, oh, this is clearly crow territory. Whereas like our buddy befriended crows. And so, when he used to walk his dog, the crows would follow him and kind of would hang out. But then every once in a while you'd see like a pigeon. You're like, oh, they're encroaching. Like the pigeons are coming in, and then you get closer to the water, and it's crows and seagulls, and it's a whole thing going on.
It is
on top of everything.
There's turf.
Yeah,
so
sure.
I'm sure in Yadamon there's turf. It also
the gang wars of the small rodent and bird community.
We also have fish that float through the air.
Yeah.
Right. Like, is there certain times of year? I remember like working at Wizards in November.
Crowtober.
Oh yeah, and it would be like.
October, man.
The skies
it would blacken.
Yep. It was just
the parking lot.
Streams of crows. And you come out at night, and then it's just, they're everywhere.
The parking lot is full of them. So we call it Crowtober.
And that was it. And so, like, is there a time of year where it's like, oh yeah, there's just fish everywhere in the sky? And like, if you're in a high rise or whatever, and it's just like, if you open your windows, it's just fish and fish might come in and stuff. You're like, oh god, you have to drive them out of your.
I like the idea that they're all gross fish too. Like, it'd be fun if it was like, well, they were like, oh, if they tasted good, we could eat them. But like, no, they're like
mudsucker fish.
They're like, the fish that no one wants to eat. So they're just.
It's like the idea of having these like. The equivalent of bottom feeders, but they float and will stick to windows.
Sucking on the window. And you're like,
just like get out of here.
Lamprey mouth on the window.
I used to have, back in college, I used to have a fish tank. And my favorite fish was something called a dojo loach. And it was this long bottom feeder. And it would just kind of sit there. Yeah, I imagine these
loach
things.
Around.
Yeah, it was loach around.
Oh, what's a fish that no one wants to eat? Well, I guess people eat them, but like plenty of people eat eel, but they're also like kind of gross, and you're just like, I want this thing out of here. We could just have like, once like in June, eels swarm.
Oh man, they migrate. Yeah, they migrate across.
Unagi, man. Like, I eat eels.
I like unagi.
I mean, I used to live in California. I used to live on the Eel River, one of the very few rivers that flow north, I might add. And every now and then, in San Francisco, the sushi chefs used to come up to the Eel River and hunt for eels, and they get a big bucket of eels, and they go back and they serve it up. So eels.
So then maybe it's a thing where it's like everyone's eating good because it's eels, but there's too many of them, so it's like still really annoying.
Or there could be something else that comes in and poaches the eels.
You don't eat city eels.
That's true.
Oh, there it is.
There's a city.
It's like, we eat birds. I'm not going to eat that pigeon. That's crazy.
I mean, also like in the park system, like you think of like the trope of Central Park in New York, like, during, certain hours of the day, it's like this great place to gather and have festivals or art displays or like people doing Tai Chi or whatever.
Shakespeare in the park.
But then at night, it could change, and people are like, you got to stay out of certain areas of Central Park because like dangerous things can happen there.
I kind of like what if there's not a spirit, but some sort of like collective monster group, like when I say collective monster group, I think like a goblin or
the Uragama.
Uragama, right? Like a monster that has several gathering in a space, and they work as a unit. Where they like appear at night in the park, and they like
Yokario?
Yeah, like maybe they hunt the rodents or the animals in the park, and they never really go into the city. Like they stay in the park, but like it makes the park kind of dangerous.
We've talked about the subway of Yadamon, and maybe there are monsters that live down there, and they come out and do what you're saying. Like, and it's sort of like, hey, the city understands that there's things in the subway, there's monsters. They have theirs, and they come out at night, and they hunt things in the parks at night, and it's just sort of understood, like, just stay out of there, because they're going to do their thing, and as long as we keep that balance, everything's fine. We can coexist with monsters, and that's good. Nobody. But if you get in their way or you go into their territory, you try and they might, take your, if you're walking your dog, they might snag your dog.
Yeah, I don't hate that. Like monsters who are specifically looking to hunt. Like I think that there's like a level of intelligence when it comes to monsters where they have other desires. Like if we couldn't have howlers do that, because howlers would come into the city and they'd be like, well, there's a basket of apples sitting on the side of the street. They would go and steal everything that's not unattended, right? Yeah. So, and we can't, same with Eukario, right? Like they have their own internal desires. They'd probably start partying or something, right? So it has to be like a monster or a group of monsters that's like, no, we're in the park at night because this is when we can catch the city eels that we like to eat. Or they're after the creatures, the other little vermin and things, and maybe there's almost like a symbiotic kind of relationship where it's like, oh yeah, we don't like. Could you imagine if New York was like, hey, no one go to Central Park at night. There's trolls there, but they're gonna eat all the rats, and everyone would be like, okay, trolls can live in New York. These rats are awful. Like we need to get rid of them, right? Yeah. And so it's almost like Yadamon's like, oh, we're gonna let them do their thing. We won't go into the park because they're getting rid of like pests that we don't like.
It could even be like food. Like, there isn't a garbage truck that goes around Yadamon getting garbage. But if there are monsters that enjoy garbage, then whatever you leave out, you just leave the scraps out and then you kind of shutter your doors.
My partner describing me as I'm eating Taco Bell at 2 a.m.
Yeah, that's right. That's basically it. It's just like you're just going out. But it could be something like that where, the streets are clean in the morning, but it's because
slimes have gone through
and
cleaned everything.
I think the issue with slimes is that they're aware that they're ingredients. And so they wouldn't want to be
away and leave their little spot, like shed their tails like lizards.
They'd want to stay away because witches, it'd be like, well, put the trash out for the slimes. And witches would be like, there are no slimes.
No, there's an ordinance. You cannot harvest them because they help maintain the city.
The slimes here are habituated.
So that leads to a bigger question that I know Miles has asked off camera several times, which is like, who is enforcing law within Obojima or within Yadamon, right? Like we've in general said within Yadamon that it's like the culture is built up in a way that it's like understood that these are how you do things, and when people don't do those things, they're bad apples type situation. And so it's not law, but it's pretty naturally enforced by the culture. Japan is a great example of that, right? It's not law that you need to do a bunch of things a certain way, but culturally that's how they do things. And
they still have police,
They still have police. Yeah. They still have police to enforce laws when people break those things. And so it's like, I think the question is there a person enforcing witches to not go and kill slimes and take all their stuff? Or is it culturally within the witch community like, no, you let the slimes live because they eat the trash?
I mean, it's probably culturally even in the whole of the city, like merchants and shop owners and restaurateurs, like they're all sort of, it benefits mostly the city as a whole. And if you were to break that, you're kind of wrecking
a good thing.
So it's sort of a cultural frown upon.
You could also imagine things like if it gets out of control, like the slimes are running amok, but they are like they're kind of their population is, you can imagine that there is like a this harvest season. Come and harvest, every witch can harvest, a handful of slime or whatever.
Yeah, it could be a festival. Another festival,
Why not? Party.
I mean, it makes me think, all these things of like where we were talking about the crows coming in. It's like Crow Festival.
Crowcon.
Or the Crowcon. Or when all all the fish from Mount Orbora come down and, then they go through Yadamon on this migration. And it's like, oh, it's the fish festival. And some people could like hate it, and some people could love it. And, not everybody has to love every festival. But then you could have this, like the great slime culling. And so, all the young witches are, rubbing their hands together. It's their first slime, gathering. And
it's like the Purge. Once a year.
All the laws.
But to expand on what you were saying about the authority, I mean, can Yadomon? We talked about the idea of like the sword schools, when push comes to shove, will oftentimes act, in the cities, in the defense of the city. But that's not like a law, like a enforcement of the law. That is protecting the city. Is there basically a town guard? Is there equivalent of are there constables here? Because that's also great for just for adventures, right? If you run afoul of the local constable or whatever, like that's,
or the constable comes to you that needs assistance.
Yeah.
Like, hey, we've got howlers that
we're
are
overwhelmed. Yeah, we're not equipped for this.
Yeah.
So the reason I've been hesitant against it is I don't like. I think one thing we've done very good at within Obojima is removing not the concept, but within the culture of Obojima, there is not a power grab that happened. Like, we, as a culture in general, desire a lot of power in general. And so, like, by enforcing, like, having enforcers who tell other people what to do.
But it's not necessarily that. It's more along the lines of, even though there's not like there's not the thing about like we're trying to grab political power or somebody trying to take over Yadomon. It's more, we've talked about in Obojima, there are individual bad actors, right? Like, I might be a jerk, and I might, if I'm a pickpocket, right? If I'm there to, take your stuff, or if I'm waiting in one of these weird blind spots in the city to, blackjack you and, and take your stuff. Then there's something there is, I could go report this somewhere. Like, hey, somebody broke my windows or whatever, or somebody knifed my friend or whatever. There are people who are just individually bad, even though like structurally we're not putting in these like larger political.
I think the sword school does a fairly decent job of fitting that space.
So you would go to the sword school.
I think you would go to the sword school because the sword school, not all, but Caden and Moon's, which is in Yadomon, right? Caden and Moon's sword school, that like a big portion of what they offer in between their classes of training their students is like donation of time and energy towards the community.
Right. There's the concept of service.
Right.
And so if that's the case, then they are filling in that role, that they are essentially acting as patrols.
Right. They're like, I think the difference is like, you see two sword school students on the side of the street. They're not patrolling looking for trouble. They're probably sweeping or like helping someone like carry groceries to their home or like picking up garbage. And if they were to see something bad happen, they might step in. Or if someone were to come at, like, they're seen as like, if something is happening, they can be asked for help. And based off of what the sword school's teaching are to help the community, that's something that they're not required to do, but they would most likely step up to do it because that's just kind of like the culture of the sword school.
Yeah.
That's the way I kind of look at it. And then in the same regard, I think the guardian angels are the same space where it's like, if a specific thing about a demon were to come up, someone might come to the guardian angel. We need to come up with a new name because that's just the actual organization from the 80s.
I mean, there was talk about whatever this group was, that they were kind of more sort of like, I don't know, less structured than a sword school. They were more sort of like a kind of like not a street gang, but they were.
Yeah, I mean, with the sword school, it's like you could go to their organization's headquarters and talk to Caden or Moon and say, like, I need help with this. In the Guardian Angels, not actually Guardian Angels, but whatever they're called, it's like you need to know someone. Like, oh, my buddy knows a buddy who says he's got a friend who's in the in the club or whatever, right? Like, it's not like a thing you could go. You probably couldn't find them if you didn't know how to find them already. Right? Like, that's I think the difference between the two of those is like the sword school is readily available to serve their community, and the guardian angels are they're serving their community, but in like a guerrilla warfare style, where they're like man on the street, kind of around, but if you can't find them, you can't find them.
Does this group have any kind of uniform or any kind of thing that signifies that they're a part of it? Do they have like a patch or a?
I mean, yeah. I think we talked about like, have them having like a jacket that they all wear or something like that, or some sort of thing to.
Oh, that's right. We're an only members jacket.
Yeah. Right. Like they have something that shows off that they're part of this organization, but there's only like 20 of them in the entire city. So it's like, it's still hard to get a hold of. I wouldn't say they're a reliable source for people to solve problems.
Yeah, because we say in the book that Yadamon has 10,000 people in it.
Yeah.
Which is significant. I mean, that's enough people where it's like you can get lost in this place.
Yeah.
You can become a faceless member of this, anonymous member of this city.
Sorry, I was just reminded. There is also, so kind of like, I'm reading like the NPCs, and you had, there's Tatsu and the Goro-Goros. So Tatsu is the leader of a gang of miscreant youths who go around the city doing mostly harmless acts of vandalism. So there's also, so we talked about like the side of keeping order, but against what? And so like building out that concept of, who
are the miscreants and the bad actors in this world.
Yeah, I think that's
and the levels.
Like, yeah, there's like harmless. It's the spirit situation again.
Yeah.
With spirit to demon. Like, when does a thing go from being a spirit to being demonic? It's the same thing with like, when does someone going from being like kind of annoying and the like culturally like the community doesn't like them to being like, no, this is a problem that someone needs to step in and deal with. Yeah, I think
it makes me think of like, okay, what are the levels? Like, I don't think we have serial killers in Obojima.
No.
But I think we have something that is weird, like the eye stealer. Like, there's just somebody wakes up and they've just got smoking holes, and then they're like, and somebody runs to the sword school and says, my uncle lost his eyes to this something, and then another person loses, and you get brought in. Like, that I think is probably the most scary sort of, and it feels like that kind of Japanese ghost story kind of thing.
It's still mysterious. It's
still
rooted in that. It's not just grisly.
Yeah. And I think too with that, I don't see a clear right answer on which faction to go to.
Yeah, true.
You could have gone to the witches.
Yeah.
Or even
probably.
Aha.
That's better. Yeah.
Like, I think it just depends on, because is the eye stealer a human with a cursed object? Is the eye stealer a demon? Is the eye stealer
something else?
A monster or a creature or something, right? Like, I think,
did they drink the wrong potion?
I think depending on the danger and the thing that it is, one of the major organizations can probably assist you with that task.
And maybe that's part of the thing of this, is like finding out which is the right faction to go to.
Right. And so I think when it comes down to it, to answer the full question, which is like, is there a major organization that is protecting the city? No. I think it's probably small groups of people who are taking up their time to help assist in this. Like, I think a great example of this is Castle in the Sky.
I thought you were going to say Naruto.
A great example of this is Naruto. If everyone's a ninja, you don't need a guard.
All roads lead to Naruto.
All roads lead to ninja. No. So in Castle in the Sky, I don't know their names. I'm so sorry. The two main characters, the equivalent of like the princess, right? This girl's being chased. She meets a young boy. The two of them are being accosted by pirates who are after them because she has a special necklace. Sorry if I'm ruining Castle in the Sky for anyone.
From 1986.
Yeah, exactly. But at a certain point in time, they're running through the city. She escapes. She gets to the city. She meets a boy, and they're running away from them. And they run through the city, and these are bad actors. We are saying these are villains. And who comes to stop them? Not the guard. but like the local big tough guy and the rest of the people step in to protect these children. And they puff up their chest, and there's this big fight between the two of them. And later down the line, like we said, we talk about in villains, those pirates become heroes. And the main villain's revealed. There's a secondary villain who becomes the main villain, right? I don't see why we can accept it in a film like that, but because D&D is like very, we have to have a guard, right? Like we can do it. It's possible. Humans can be good and not, I know most humans suck, but we can be good. There can be a culture where it's just like the community steps up to protect itself and others. Yeah. And so we don't need organizations to do it because we're going to do it together because we all care about each other.
Yeah.
I think the same thing happens in Yadaman. I think the first step, if someone can't take care of themselves, would be to go to the sword school or go to one of the major factions who in general like to take care of the community because they care about it. But if it was a flash in the moment thing where a howler popped out of the forest and attacked someone, the local chef,
the shop owner,
and the guy who's delivering your mail and the person who's doing blown glass down the street all come out with a different object to go beat the howler back. And afterwards they sit you down and they get you a drink or something because you're tired. And they go, oh, I'm glad you made it out of there. This one's on the house, right? Yeah. Like that's how the community reacts within Yadaman. That's how I see Obojima. I don't, it doesn't need to be this organization because the community cares about each other.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think it's fun. And then we just have to build that in and say, here's what happens if a band of howlers came out of the river and they were, going to cause some trouble. These are the steps that would happen.
Yeah.
It's totally doable.
I think. Yeah.
The more that I sit with that, the more I like it. Because that adds character.
I've convinced Ari.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like part of me at first, I was just walking through my thought process. It was like, well, what separates the city from a village is like I can imagine in a place like Okiri, where the villagers come out and do a thing, and then when you get to the city, because it's big and you kind of have less of that person to person connection, because that's part of like what makes the city. They have the anonymity and all this kind of stuff. But then I was like, what's the Obojima version of the city? And that made me smile because I'm like, I want to live in a city where the residents would still come out, and even if they don't know you personally, like they might in the village, it's still the right thing to do, to go and do that. Like, that's super cool.
It makes me think of like Yadaman is just a bunch of Okiri villages just stacked together, and it's like this one area, this one little tiny neighborhood of Yadaman is basically another Okiri village, and they just because they're Obojimans, that's the way they're going to act. Everybody in that neighborhood knows everybody in that neighborhood looks out for each other, and that's just the way it is. And then those neighborhoods, as they're next to each other, there's sort of an overlap, like this part of that neighborhood knows that other part of the neighborhood, and they interconnect. So everybody kind of knows everybody, but it's just like if you were to say, does that person know who lives on the other side of the city? No.
Yeah.
But it's all interconnected.
Networks. Yeah. And it also keeps the adventurer important. Like if something's happening to Yadaman and you guys are, you're all there, you and your adventurers, you have to help.
Yeah.
They need you. They need your help.
Yeah.
It's not going to be, just, the local guards will handle it,
I think, and we should stop because we're way past our time.
Oh boy.
But my final statement on local guard. I think local guard in most D&D does two things. One, serve as a tool to stop your players from doing things, and then they get their asses kicked. And then the players get in trouble. Two, they serve as a tool to say that this is a danger beyond the standards of a normal person.
Yep.
Often they are inept and they can't handle the thing. Thus, the players must step in.
Yeah, when the players misbehave, the guards are the most powerful character.
Exactly.
But when there's like shenanigans going on, it's like the bandits are attacking.
The guards are
just
all
fall
like
to pieces.
100%. And so I don't think that's necessary. Get rid of the guard, and there's always a need for the players. I think you said it. Great thing.
Yeah.
That's just a bit. I think we could ramble on. Yatterman forever.
We could.
And we're going to, because the next episode's also going to be about Yatterman. You mentioned it earlier, but I want to talk about the subway system.
Sweet.
And the underground.
Oh,
so I think that's what we're going to jump into next.
Cool.
Thank you for joining us on the Obojima Podcast. You can find us on Discord and YouTube and Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, other places probably. Yeah, join us and hang out. There's a section on the Discord for podcast questions and places for people to talk about the podcast episodes. You can also talk in the YouTube comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts on our thoughts on Yatterman and what you wish you could see in Yatterman. Yeah. Should Yatterman have a guard? Are we wrong?
Just one.
Just one guard. Link from The Legend of Zelda. God. He's there and he's defending everyone.
Immortal and indestructible.
Exactly. Anyways, we'd love to hear your thoughts, and we will catch you next time. Bye.